Hello, everybody, and welcome into the Athletic Fantasy Baseball Podcast. We are here with you on Thursday, May 20th. Michael Beller and Derek Van Riper getting back to our Thursday rotation of beat writers, and joining us to start today's show, Tim Britton, who covers the New York Mets for us. Tim, thanks for joining us this morning.
Oh, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, this is a team with a lot going on. Just want to dive right in. So many injuries. We've got Michael Conforto, Jeff McNeil, Brandon Nimmo, JD Davis. All these guys are on the IL. Pete Alonso sat out yesterday's game with a wrist issue. I mean, just so many guys that are regulars, that are starters, that are guys who you count on for, not just being in the lineup, but big time production. How are the Mets going to cover all this while they have to?
It's been creative use of the roster the last week because they'd been experiencing some injuries. They lost Nimmo and Davis the first week of May, and those guys had been really the most consistent parts of their lineup to that point. And then the last week has just accelerated it to another degree, where they lost Conforto and McNeil on Sunday against Tampa Bay. They lose Kevin Pillar, on Monday night when he gets hit in the face. Alonso was out of the lineup on Wednesday with a wrist issue that he got x-rays done. They don't expect that to be an IL placement at this point, but it's affected certainly his production on the field while he's been playing through it. So you're seeing, Jonathan Villar has started 16 consecutive games, a guy who has been a good fantasy player in the past because of the stolen base threat that he is. And he's second on the team in home runs at this stage, only behind Alonso, because they've had so much lack of power that really the only regulars in that lineup at the moment are Alonso, James McCann, and Dominic Smith. And even McCann has been supplanted a little bit this past week by Tomas Nido, who's come up with really their biggest hits in the last 3 games.
Yeah, you mentioned VR, Tim, and given the timetables for all these moving parts in this lineup, does he look like a temporary regular, at least for the next few weeks? For those who picked him up a couple of weeks ago, can they still expect him to have a pretty prominent role, at least through the end of the month?
Yeah, while I think JD Davis might be the first of this glut of players to come back for the Mets, and he plays third, VR's been playing third. If Davis comes back, VR can play elsewhere. He probably shifts over to second, where McNeil is the regular. He's on the IL. Jose Peraza has done a decent job there filling in, but, I think they prefer VR over Peraza on a more consistent basis. And second is VR's best defensive position probably. So he probably slots in there until McNeil is back. Depending on how other things go, VR can also play the outfield, usually center field. So, if Nimmo is slowed, if Conforto is slowed and they want to play Nimmo in right and VR in center a little bit while Pillar is out, the versatility of some of those pieces helps make it easier for them to bounce guys around. Like even if McNeil comes back, VR can stay at second. They can play McNeil in the outfield because he's done that as well. So they can move these pieces around a lot to kind of construct the best batting order while making it work defensively.
Yeah, Jonathan VR actually among the top 25 producers in Roto value over the last couple of weeks. Derek and I are going to be getting into some of those guys a little later in the show, but VR definitely has been a nice return filling in for all these guys who have been injured on the Mets. Another guy who is on the IL right now, Jacob deGrom, set for a rehab start later today. Let's just, I know this is a risky thing to say with this team, but let's just assume right now that goes well. What's the next step for deGrom if we do get that news later tonight that all was good in the rehab outing?
Yeah, I think if all goes well, then they'd probably pencil him in, not in pen, but pencil him in for a Tuesday start against the Rockies at home at Citi Field. That would give him his usual between starts routine. The last time he experienced this lat tightness, this back tightness, they didn't put him on the IL. They had him kind of. It wasn't a rush back, but he didn't go through his usual 2 bullpens, touch and feel session, the whole preparation that he goes through before a start. They've done that this time before his rehab start, and then they'll try to do that again between the rehab start and a big league start. So presuming he doesn't experience, increased pain over that period of time, increased soreness like he has the last couple times, then he'd be able to slot back into the rotation next week.
Some more potential good news for this rotation on the horizon. Noah Syndergaard started up his minor league rehab assignment this week. Looks like 4 scoreless and 44 pitches that first time out. How many more starts do you think we're going to see from him on that assignment before he's actually ready to contribute for the Mets again?
Yeah, Luis Rojas said it's going to be at least 4 rehab starts total. They'd go 4 innings, 4 innings, 5 innings, 5 innings. At that point, they can probably reassess and see if they want to do the 6 inning thing in the majors. It might depend on what the state of their rotation is at that point. But they've mentioned mid-June as kind of the target for Syndergaard for a long time now, and it seems like he's on track for that. So as much as so many other things have gone wrong for them injury-wise, Syndergaard has been kind of steadily progressing the way they had hoped and on their timeline as planned, really since January. So it's looking good for him at this point, but we've said that before with the Mets.
That is absolutely true. Easy to get excited though about where this team could be a month from now if all these guys are indeed back in the lineup and in the rotation. The big move this team made in the offseason, of course, was the deal with Cleveland getting Carlos Carrasco and Francisco Lindor. Hasn't exactly worked out. Carlos Carrasco hasn't thrown a pitch this season. Francisco Lindor has been nowhere near the Francisco Lindor that we expect him to be. Is there any explaining what's gone wrong with him to this point? And are you seeing any signs of a turnaround other than the fact that he's got this track record? He's still in his 20s. He's Francisco Lindor, and we should expect a player of his caliber to eventually regress to his mean.
Yeah, I think you've seen, he went through that. I think it was 0 for 26 stretch a couple weeks back, and that was, you see hitters go through slumps. You're not used to seeing a star go through a slump like that, where he looks lost at the plate. It's not him hitting into a lot of hard luck. He looked lost. He didn't look like himself. He found it a little bit for a stretch, and then had a rough weekend series against the Rays. Not totally uncommon. A lot of guys have rough weekend series against the Rays pitching, and has been a bit better against Atlanta. I think having covered teams in big markets that make big acquisitions, those guys, it can snowball on you fast in a market like New York or Boston, where I worked previously, where if you don't get off to the start you want, the fan base gets hostile pretty quickly. You get booed on the second homestand, the way Lindor was. I think he's adjusted to that. And I think, the track record suggests that he'll be fine longer term. I think my concern would be that the ceiling for his offensive performance is not what it was in 2018, or when he was hitting 37 home runs, I think was his career high, and the OPS plus was 135 or so. It's probably a little bit closer to, he'll be, a 115 OPS plus guy, maybe 120, which is still obviously huge value for a premium defensive shortstop. He's been an outstanding defender all year for a team that hasn't been good defensively in the past. And they're a lot different this year, in part because of what he's brought to the middle of their infield. But I think you probably lower your expectations for his very best performance, but certainly you expect him to get closer to where he's been as a player than he's been so far this year.
He was probably never booed in Cleveland, was he? Right? I mean, that was probably the first time he ever got booed by the home crowd.
He did say that was the first time that it happened to him. So that's how New York works.
Yeah, that definitely never happened to him in Cleveland. Let's talk about Dominic Smith just for a few minutes here. He's off to a slow start, and frankly, I was a believer in what he was doing in 2019 and 2020. I mean, he's always a bat first prospect coming through the Mets system. And it just seemed like he was really unlocking the power in what I thought was a sustainable sort of way. But it's been a slow start for him. What's been the difference for Dominic Smith to this point, Tim?
Yeah, the first month of the season, he couldn't hit breaking balls, which was strange because he was really good against them last year. That was part of the breakout, was his ability to handle secondary stuff. And I think I want to say he was like 1 for 27 off of breaking balls in the month of April. He's been much better than that in May. I haven't checked it in a couple days, but he was something like 8 for 19 off of them for the first 2 weeks of May. So I think, again, you're seeing him come out of it a little bit. It's not to the extent you want. He's still sitting on 2 home runs. Like we were talking about, the lack of power from this lineup has been pretty stark. And you wonder if he's one of those guys where the ball not flying quite the same way impacts his power a little bit more, because he's a natural gap to gap guy, doubles hitter who the power when the ball is flying gets there, where you can hit for a few more home runs. The Mets have also played a lot of cold weather games. They haven't, they got snowed out in Denver. Mm-hmm. They played in Chicago in sub 40-degree weather. That probably doesn't help the ball flying and maybe explain some of their lack of power. But we just haven't seen the all fields gap power from Smith that we saw last year when he was on a pace for something like 90 extra base hits over 162 game season. It was insane, the amount of doubles he was racking up. We just haven't seen that yet this year. But I think you're starting to see him come out of that again with the way he's handling all pitches now rather than just the fastball.
All right, as our check-in with the very injured New York Mets. Hopefully things get a little healthier for them going forward. Tim Britton, our New York Mets beat writer, thanks for joining us here today.
Oh, anytime. Thanks for having me.
Manscaped is back with its new trimmer, the Lawnmower 4.0. What makes this trimmer different than all other trimmers? Feel like I'm celebrating Passover or something. New multi-function on-off switch can engage a travel lock created for people who like to travel. Lawnmower 4.0 gives you the ability to turn the 4K LED spotlight on and off when needed for a more precise shave. The new trimmer even allows you to customize your trim all over through additional guard lengths with sizes 1 to 4. This thing's waterproof. It's got a wireless charger. It's got everything you need, basically the best tool in the grooming game. And right now you can get 20% off and free shipping with the code FBIN15 at manscaped.com. That's 20% off with free shipping at manscaped.com. Use the code FBIN15. Unlock your confidence and always use the right tools for the job with Manscaped. Look, no one's perfect. Even the best baseball players strike out with the bases loaded. So if you feel like you come up short in the bedroom sometimes, it's perfectly okay. If it's bothering you, though, there are options. Go to GetRoman.com/FBPod now. With Roman, you can get a free online evaluation and ongoing care for ED, all from the comfort and privacy of your home. A U.S. licensed healthcare professional will work with you to find the best treatment plan, and if medication is appropriate, it ships to you with free 2-day shipping. The whole process is straightforward, simple, and discreet. Getting started, that's very simple too. Just go to GetRoman.com/FBPod and complete an online visit. Take care of your ED without leaving home. Complete an online visit today. Connect with a doctor and take care of it. Go to GetRoman.com/FBPod now to get $15 off your first month. There's a straightforward way to take care of ED. GetRoman.com/FBPod. Get started right now and save $15 on your first month of treatment. All right, we are joined now by Jake Kaplan. Jake covers the Astros for us. And as DVR was saying before we got going, conversely to the team we just talked about, the New York Mets, Astros have been relatively healthy, especially in the lineup. And this team is just hitting all over the place. You got a ton of guys mashing right there with the White Sox in terms of all WRC plus and WOBA, Team WOBA as the best offensive teams in the league. Individually, I would like to start with Yuli Gurriel. This guy is hitting everything in sight. 338, 408, 576 on the slash line, 7 homers, strong StatCast numbers. What's fueling this rebound that we're seeing from him this season?
Yeah, it's been pretty shocking. I mean, after his 2020, he was pretty bad last year. It's been really crazy to see how he's continued to improve at age, what is he, 36? Mm-hmm. The big key for him has been he's been more selective at the plate, and really from the start of the season, he's just not chasing as much as he used to. He's known as a free swinger who makes a lot of contact, but that also means a lot of, bad pitches he's hitting for not great contact. So he's really kind of just like fine-tune that, and it sounds so simple, just, stop chasing, but somehow he's done it.
I think Gurriel is a player that I'm wrong about every year. When I start to believe he has the down year like he did last year, or when I give up on him, he bounces back and does something ridiculous like he's doing right now. Carlos Correa is a guy I'm a little more consistent with Correa. I keep thinking that we're going to get a completely healthy and productive season from him. So far, so good on the health front, really. The numbers aren't eye-popping. He's hitting 264 with a 330 OBP and a 428 slugging percentage. But that's 18% better than league average because of this crappy run environment that we're in right now. So what have you seen from Correa so far? And do you think there is a power binge on the horizon?
I don't know. It does feel like it's been a lot of singles, right? It seems like every year we're waiting for that power binge, and it hasn't really come in a while. So our colleague Nick Groke and myself, we did a shortstop tiers for Thursday. That's on The Athletic. And one point I made, it was the free agent shortstop tier, so the upcoming free agent class. And one point I made was, like some teams in free agency are going to talk themselves into being the one that untaps the Correa that we've always expected from an offensive standpoint, but there's others who are probably going to say maybe he just is what he is, right? And at some point, his bat it's good, but it's not, the amazing elite power that you saw in early in his career that everyone's always expected.
Yeah, It's a loaded free agent, shortstop class. So definitely going to have to check that out when it is available to us. Yordan Alvarez, let's get to him here. Obviously cannot argue with the pure numbers that Yordan's putting up. The bottom line is great. 343, 373, 586. He's got 7 homers in 150 trips to the plate. One thing that does jump out, and again, you can't really say it's a negative given what he is producing, but a 3.3% walk rate. He was at 14.1% in his big rookie year in 2019. The minor league walk rates were always in the double digits. So it's just strange. Not necessarily bad, but it's strange. Is this a deliberate change in his approach, or is it just, hey, things happen in 6 weeks of baseball and it's going to even out eventually?
Yeah, I think it's more the latter. But you're right. It is strange. And I can't really figure it out. I mean, obviously his batting average is up. So maybe he's replaced some of those walks with hits. But when you look at the kind of below the hood, there's not anything that stands out. He to me at least, maybe you guys could figure it out better than me. But I don't know. He still seems to be that same selective guy that his approach is what separates him. He has a really good approach at the plate, and he's been the same guy this year. It's just for whatever reason, those walk numbers, he's walked 5 times in the whole season so far.
Yeah, Gurriel, I think he's a special hitter. I mean, I don't have a lot of concerns about him at this point. So I'm looking at it more like that blip scenario that was described, where it's probably not a concern. Like, we're not looking at Álvarez, this guy that's going to be a sub 5% walk rate hitter going forward. The Astros do have a lot of injuries on the pitching side, Jake. Jose Urquidy, the latest to go on the IL with shoulder inflammation. Of course, Framber Valdez and Jake Odorizzi have been making their way back as well. Where do things stand with that group? When might we begin to see some of those pitchers getting back into the rotation for the Astros?
I think you'll see all 3 pretty soon. Urquidy's seems like a very minor thing. He's already resumed throwing. I think if they didn't have all these off days and enough start pitching to get by, there was a chance he wasn't even going to hit the IL. So not too much concern there. Framber Valdez and Jake Odorizzi are each 1 rehab start into a rehab assignment. Both will make their second starts this weekend in the with Sugarland in AAA, who's now the Astros AAA affiliate after being an indie ball team for all those years. So I think you think 2 or 3 rehab assignment starts for each of those guys, and then they're probably back. So the Astros are going to have some interesting decisions as it relates to Christian Javier, Luis Garcia, the kind of the back end rotation guys who have pitched so well. And what do they do with them, or what do they do with Odorizzi and Urquidy?
Yeah, let's get into those guys really quick here. Let me start with Javier. Over the last 4, bit of a rocky run, giving up a lot of homers. Again, is this a blip on the radar or a cause for real concern?
I think he's going to give up homers because he's an elevated 4-seam guy, right? I think he got lucky in the first however many starts that he wasn't giving up homers, and now it's kind of evening out a little bit. But I think if he limits them to solo homers, he's going to be fine. It's just, and I think he has so far for the most part, but it's kind of like that Verlander Cole thing, maybe not Cole this year, but when he was with the Astros, those guys would give up solo homers. So it's part of living up in the zone with your 4-seam fastball.
Yeah, Jake, do you get the sense with Luis Garcia, just because he's one of the younger options, he's got minor league options remaining, that as everybody gets healthy, that his performance doesn't necessarily dictate that he gets a spot in the rotation, even though he probably deserves it just based on how well he's pitched?
Yeah, definitely. I wrote about this the other day on the site, and I think it was hard to kind of come to a conclusion on what I think they're going to do, but I think what I settled on is Garcia to AAA, Javier to the bullpen. Just because, like you said, Garcia has options, and they need someone to stay stretched out for the inevitable next injury, right? Like, they're not going to get by the rest of the year with just these 5 guys they'll have in 2 weeks. So they're going to need Garcia to start again at some point. Keeping him out as insurance, stretched out as insurance, seems to make a lot of sense. And with Javier, we've seen him out of the bullpen before. He did it in the playoffs, and he's so good first time through the order that you could see them doing kind of like a multi-inning relief thing with him, especially when you get a bunch of righties in a row, because he's dominated righties.
Good problem for the Astros when these guys come back, and certainly a good thing for everyone who is invested in those guys who are on their way back. Not necessarily the best thing in the fantasy world for people who have been invested in Christian Javier and Luis Garcia, if that indeed does come to fruition and we see those changes with a fully healthy Houston rotation. That's Jake Kaplan, our Houston Astros beat writer here at The Athletic. Jake, thanks again for joining us.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks, guys.
Hey, would you like to make a bet on the Mets or the Astros or anyone else here in the baseball world today, this weekend, whatever it might be? Do so with our partners at BetMGM. Sign up today. Exclusive betting partner of The Athletic. What you're going to get is a $1,000 risk-free first bet plus a 3-month subscription to The Athletic. What more could you ask for? All you got to do, go to BetMGM.com/TAMLB. Take advantage of this special offer from the king of sportsbooks. Again, that is BetMGM.com/TAMLB. This is an offer for new customers paid out in bonus dollars. Visit betmgm.com for terms and conditions. All right, TVR, let's move into the second half of the show here. Now, the last time I was on this show was 5 weeks ago. We played a little game called Is This Real? We were going to look into things that were happening in the majors right then at the moment. We were going to do it every week or mostly every week, and we were going to determine, is this real? And then my daughter decided that she was done waiting and came 2 weeks early, and so I haven't been on the show since then. So I am happy to be back with you talking about this, and I thought we could make up for all that time by just devoting the entire second half of the show to Is This Real? So here's what I've done. Pulled up a list of the top 25 players or top 25 hitters, in Roto Value over the last 2 weeks. And this is, it's a bit of a moving target. I used my home league where we have OBP in place of batting average. So it's a little bit different, but I cross-referenced it with WRC plus, WOBA, OPS plus, stats like that. And they line up close enough where maybe one of these players isn't in the top 25 in your league over the last 2 weeks, but he's probably in the top 30 at worst. So somewhere in there. And we're going to determine whether this is real or not. And I'll also say that when we say it, if we say, yes, this is real, we don't necessarily mean that the first guy we've got, Adolis García, is going to be a top 25 hitter for the rest of the season. But what we mean is that we can buy it. We can buy him being a legitimate, easy, no question about it, fantasy player and starter for the rest of the season. So that sound good? All the ground rules clear?
Good ground rules.
All right, let's do it. Adolis García, last 2 weeks, 340, 377, 600, 4 homers, 4 steals, 53 plate appearances, a guy we've talked about across our suite of fantasy podcasts. So I just want to get him in here with this 2-week run. How are we feeling about Adolis García? Is this real?
I think it's real in the sense that the Rangers do not have a lot of currently ready alternatives to replace him, especially. 11 homers, 5 steals. I mean, those are great numbers over 35 games. We're talking about a guy that showed power and speed in the minors, was old for the level coming through the minors, so that probably tempered our expectations. He's never really walked all that much at any of his stops, except Double-A, which is where he debuted. He walked 7.6% of the time in 2017 at that level. He's walked 5% or less everywhere he's been until now, and he's only at 5.6% with the Rangers. So he's a flawed player given that combination of elevated K rate, low walk rate, but he does damage when he connects. He makes a ton of hard contact. It's reflected in the barrel rate. The speed gives him another thing for us to get excited about as fantasy players. I mean, it's one other way to carry that value. I could see the next 35 games, including a deep slump. Like that's the way it works. The league adjusts the players like this. Right. They're forced to adjust back. The projections kind of highlight the risk here. The bat projection has them at 219, 264, 423 the rest of the way. That's with 20 homers, though, in 99 games and 7 steals. So if you can accept the batting average risk, I think you get a nice combination of power and speed. You get good run production because he's playing every day. Adolis García has had 1 day off since April 13th. So he's hitting in the middle third of the lineup. He's got a few decent hitters around him. The Rangers lineup as a whole is not good, but they've had a few success stories with Nate Lowe, with Garcia himself, with Nick Solak, and they've got Willie Calhoun. So at least their top 4, top 5 is credible, even though the bottom 4 in that lineup might be among the worst in the American League.
Yeah, I'm with you here. I think that, I was selling Adolis García. I remember you brought him up on It wasn't our first waiver show of the season, but obviously it was one relatively early in the season. And I just wasn't feeling it. I was off him. I didn't think that he was going to be able to have the power speed combo that he did definitely show in the minors. I didn't think it was going to be something that would be able to offset all that clear rate risk that he had, batting average, OBP, whatever you use. Obviously, there was going to be some risk there, some significant risk. And I just didn't see it all adding up to still being a big time plus player. He's proved me wrong over these, not just these last 2 weeks that we're highlighting here, but really the entire season. So I think there's enough here to buy him. The point you make about him being locked into this lineup, that there's really nowhere for them to turn. He could go on an 0 for 30 slump, and it's not like they're going to take him out of the lineup because they're overflowing with options. All that definitely accrues to his benefit. And I think that he is someone who we should be feeling pretty comfortable about. Obviously, he's already been picked up, but I don't think you're going to really be looking away from him for the rest of the season. It would take as you mentioned, there's probably a deep slump coming with the adjustments that are going to be made, just how MLB works. But I think we're talking about an extended deep slump before you get concerned about him, not just a 1 for 20 or 2 for 30 or anything like that. I think you're going to have to really see something get ugly for him before you fear what might be happening with Adolis García. And again, with what we've seen from him this season, I just don't really think there's any reason for that to happen. I mean, those bat numbers, does that feel like a comfortable projection for him for the rest of the year?
Yeah, I think you could say that the batting average floor might not be quite that bad, but you got to trust the numbers a little bit here. So if he gets 230 or 240 the rest of the way, then you're ecstatic compared to the 210 range average you're seeing. I think the player you're keeping an eye on too, if you see Garcia go into a deep slump, you want to look at the numbers of Leody Taveras at AAA. His first 10 games there have been a disaster. He's striking out more than 40% of the time. Looks overmatched right now. So that's really good news, not for Taveras, but it's good news for Garcia because Leody Taveras is probably the future center fielder of the Rangers. And even if he's a bottom third of the order hitter who's there mostly for his glove, they have to get his development right. And if he's not ready to come back and take over that job at the big league level again, that affords Garcia even more buffer with his hold in that job.
All right, let's move on to our next guy here, Robbie Grossman. The last 2 weeks, he's hit 283 with a 381 OBP and a 547, slugging percentage. 2 homers. He's got a steal. He scored 12 runs, 63 plate appearances. Some similar things going on with Grossman that we just talked about with Garcia, in that there's not a whole lot of options in this Detroit lineup. He's going to be playing for this team. He's going to be hitting at the top of the order pretty much every single day. So that playing time, that lineup position, that's locked in. That's good. That's going to provide a good floor. How much can we trust the production that we've seen over these last 2 weeks?
Yeah, for Grossman, I took a longer snapshot. I kind of combined his shortened season results with Oakland, with what he's done so far with the Tigers. And you get a guy that's hit 242 over the last 2 seasons combined, but with a 360 OBP. He's always drawn walks. That's been part of the appeal for Grossman ever since he broke in as a 4th outfielder with the Twins a few years ago. A 125 WRC plus plays. It justifies that everyday role that he has in that rebuilding Tigers team. I think the thing that I'm really most surprised by, he's got a dozen home runs in his last 93 games, but he's got 15 steals. And on a Tigers team that needs to find ways to score runs, he's going to keep getting green lights because he's been very successful. I mean, for his career, he's only 44 for 64, not necessarily the kind of success rate where you'd say, yeah, keep running. But the last 2 seasons, he's 15 for 16. So he's picking his spots really carefully. Maybe he's found some ways to get better jumps. The other thing that's kind of interesting is you look at him as a source of maybe a little more power than he had in the past. He is hitting the ball in the air more than he ever has at any point in his career. And you'd like to see that for a guy trying to unlock that extra power. It's a pitcher-friendly environment, so I'm not expecting 20 homers this season from Robbie Grossman. But if he continues to play this much, he should pretty easily cruise past his previous career high. I think he hit 11 back in 2016 as a part-time guy for the Twins. So the projections have him at like 10 to 11 the rest of the way. I'm buying that. I think if you're in an OBP league especially, he's really stable there. Maybe you get lucky in batting average. He gets hot for a few weeks and he hits 260 or 270 for a stretch instead of the usual 240. But just a nice, well-rounded player, and maybe a guy that ends up getting flipped to a contender at some point as well. I mean, what reason do the Tigers have to keep him around after the end of July?
Anticipating exactly where I wanted to take this discussion. So maybe there's like a tiny bit of risk that a contender is going to trade for him to be a 4th outfielder. I don't think that is the likely trade. I would think that the more likely move would be a contender would trade for him to upgrade their weakest outfield position. And even if it ends up happening, that's a risk that you worry about when it happens. It's not a risk you're going to worry about here on May 20th. Some StatCast numbers to back up what you were saying. 53 percentile average exit velocity, 52nd percentile in barrel rate. So the fact that he is getting an elevated fly ball rate compared with years past, that's good news because the pure power itself isn't going to drive the home run production for him. And then something that speaks to what you said, picking his spots well on the bases, 68th percentile in sprint speed. And so this does have the look of a guy who is just a smart, savvy base runner, not a guy who's going to, Tony Kemp his way to stolen bases, but who can really read pitchers, know when to steal, read counts, all those things you look for in a smart base stealer. Definitely looks like Robbie Grossman has that at his disposal. Trey Mancini, one of the best stories, of course, in Major League Baseball this season. The dude could hit. We knew that. It's great to see him bouncing back this year. 333, 423, 711, 4 homers, 16 RBI in 52 plate appearances the last 2 weeks. I think this is an easy buy. Again, he was hitting like this in 2019. Obviously not like this 711 slugging percentage, an OPS over 1100, but he was a very productive hitter for this team before he had to miss a year because of his cancer diagnosis. But Trey Mancini was always a guy who, we thought could be a very well above average, productive major league hitter. We're just seeing that play out over these last 2 weeks. For me, this is a very easy, yes, this is real, thumbs up. Where are you at on Trey Mancini?
Yeah, I think he was one of the easiest guys to root for coming into this season. And of course, coming back from cancer treatments a year ago. And as you mentioned, his 2019 was good. Like there was no reason to doubt the power. I think the big question coming out of that year was, what does the rest of the slash line look like? I mean, if he's going to be at his absolute best in a rabbit ball year, if he's going to hit 291, does that mean he's going to hit 291 in a normal environment? And I think what we're seeing right now might be a more sustainable level in the long haul. It's a hitter-friendly park, of course, in Baltimore. The weather hasn't warmed up completely yet, so I think that gives him a chance to go on a nice power tear again later on this summer. But I think we can definitely look at this and say, hey, look, the Orioles don't have anybody pushing him for playing time. He might be a trade candidate himself, so maybe he loses the park boost that he has right now at some point, but then he'd also have the benefit of better hitters around him, so it might actually be a bit of a wash if he gets traded. I'm in on Trey Mancini. I think the batting average is generally at least good, if not great. I mean, that 242 back in 2018 actually looks like an outlier now in his profile. We've seen a 2-year run now with that walk rate staying up in the 8 to 9% range. So he looks like a true middle of the order run producer at this point.
You look at the StatCast numbers, a barrel rate in the 89th percentile, a hard hit rate in the 77th percentile. The guy's just hitting the ball well. And bottom line, he's hitting the ball hard. He's hitting the ball hard consistently, and that is the surest way to positive results. So we are all in here on Trey Mancini. How about Chris Taylor? This is an interesting one, right? We know that the Dodgers are dealing with some injuries, most notably right now, at least, to both Cody Bellinger and Corey Seager. The Corey Seager injury opens up pathways to playing time for Chris Taylor, for Matt Beatty. There are a lot of guys they want to get in the lineup. Of course, Albert Pujols now in Los Angeles. So this still remains a deep team, even with the injuries. Chris Taylor, a flexible, versatile player. Obviously, we've known this for years, can play multiple positions, infield and outfield, taking advantage of some increased playing time over these last couple of weeks. 343, 477 OBP, a 514 slug, 1 homer. We know the power isn't going to be huge. A couple of steals, 44 plate appearances. Obviously, this is going to be dependent on playing time, but it seems like the playing time is going to be there enough for him in the short term until some of these other guys start coming back for the Dodgers, and we're still not exactly sure when that's going to happen. So how comfortable are you buying in on Chris Taylor? Maybe it's relative to the other guys in the Dodgers who are going to see increases in playing time. Where do you think Taylor ranks in the pecking order for all of these guys?
I think he actually, of all the players we've talked about, he's probably the most underrated of all. I mean, maybe you could say that's Robbie Grossman, but I think people appropriately adjust down for him, whereas Taylor might be one notch above Grossman because of the versatility that you mentioned and a slightly longer track record of offering up some useful power for us as fantasy players. Even as they get completely healthy, he's still a priority option in that lineup. And his versatility keeps that playing time floor really high, even when everybody's back out there. So I'm definitely in on Chris Taylor. I think he was a relative miss for a lot of people back during draft season. Didn't take much to get him. And here he is offering that usual power and speed combo, kind of pacing out for a 2020 season with a great average. We've seen something like this before. We saw it back in 2017. He hit 21 homers, stole 17 bases that year, and had a 288, 354, 496 line while doing it. I think he's an important glue guy for the Dodgers, but he plays more than you think. And I think you want to go out and try and make a move for him compared to, like, if you're looking for just let's say you're looking for a Mike Trout replacement. You're never going to replace Trout like across the board in terms of projection because he's the best player in the game in terms of projection. At least with Chris Taylor, you have a guy that can contribute in all the same categories. And if he and that Dodgers lineup are healthy and productive at the same time, those counting stats might actually look a lot like Mike Trout counting stats for a temporary stretch, albeit with less power. So I think he's exactly the type of guy you're looking for in a trade, because what the person who has him now is going to ask for relative to what he can do is probably a little bit on the light side.
Here's another thing that's in his favor. If you just look back over the last week or so, and his lineup placement has been very positive for him. We know that the Dodgers, as constructed, healthy right now, Mookie Betts, Max Muncy, Justin Turner, that's the top three in the order. Then you're seeing Chris Taylor pop up in there. He actually hit third a couple of games ago. He's hit fifth a couple of times over the last week. Like, he's going to be right up in there. We're not seeing Gavin Lux rise up from the bottom third of the order to take spots in the top third or even in the top half of the order. No one else is really going to command being an everyday player among the healthy options. Not Pujols, not Yoshi Sasugo, who the team recently got from the Rays. Like, no one else, and Will Smith, of course, but that's a different breed. No one else is going to be in there every single day. I mean, he's the safest everyday player next to Betts, Muncy, Turner, and Gavin Lux. So you're talking about someone who's going to play for this team every day, who is going to be hitting in the top, at least half, we could say the top five of the order, almost certainly when he is out there before Seager and Bellinger are back for this team. Like, this all adds up to a very productive player and one who continues to fly under the radar, even though we've seen plenty of regular season production from him, postseason heroics, guy who's been on the baseball radar for a while and still doesn't quite get the love he deserves in the fantasy baseball world. So 2 thumbs up from us for Chris Taylor. Last player who I would like to talk about here is Andrew McCutchen. Now, this is definitely a little bit more of a OBP play than a batting average play. He is hitting 283 over the last 2 weeks, but it's the 425 OBP that's driving him up some of the leaderboards that I referenced when we first got going here. 522 slugging percentage, 3 homers. Love to see that. He's got a steal in his last 62 plate appearances. We know what Andrew McCutchen has settled into at this stage of his career. Solid veteran, not the guy who he used to be, but still a very productive player. And that makes me pretty bullish when I see him going like this. How about you, Derek?
Yeah, I think he's just a solid glue guy for outfield depth at this point. I mean, I think the park sort of keeps the power afloat for him a bit, being Definitely. In Philadelphia. If he was in a more neutral or pitcher-friendly environment, I'd be pretty skeptical of the power at this point. I think it's just weird that we've reached this point with McCutchen, perennial 300-plus guy at his peak, and he's just not a source of batting average anymore. Right. The type of batted balls that he offers are not going to turn into hits all that often. So you do have to kind of recalibrate your old expectations for him, maybe even take the under on the more optimistic projections. The more pessimistic projections for him, like Steamer, have him down at 234 the rest of the way, but with some power, 17 homers, 6 steals, and good counting stats, being atop a Philly lineup that can put a lot of runs on the board. So I think it's definitely like a what you see is what you get. I kind of look at him as a guy that is likely to slow down a lot in terms of the power output per game, though, right? He's pacing out for like a 25 to 28 home run season. If you take what he's done so far and stretch it over a full 162, and I think you'd also be going the risky route expecting that much playing time for him. Given his age, you almost build in a brief stint on the IL or some maintenance days as the season wears on. So I like him, but I'm also not going overboard trying to get him right now.
Some of the things that you were saying when you were referencing where you're going to get production, where you're maybe not going to get production, sounds similar to what we talk about with Adolis García. So let's wrap up this discussion and this episode of the Athletic Fantasy Baseball Podcast, looking at those two guys. If the acquisition cost is identical, would you rather have McCutchen or Garcia?
I almost would use my situation of the standings to dictate this. If I'm trying to make up ground and catch lightning in a bottle, I think it's Garcia. And you get more barrels, you have a higher ceiling for production, And I think you get a little more balance between the runs and the RBIs based on where he hits in the order. If I'm just trying to stay afloat and I lost someone like Trout because of an injury, in that case, maybe McCutchen makes a little bit more sense because he's less likely to collapse and lose his job later on this season, right? I think the way McCutchen doesn't play is injury. Garcia has injury plus performance risk that's more heavily baked in. But if you maybe just choose in a vacuum, slight edge to Garcia, I think that barrel rate is just off the charts good right now, and he can just do so much damage, even if that K rate stays in the 28%, 30% range like we've seen so far.
Yeah, I think I'm with you there. I think you nailed it exactly. And the vacuum does lead me to Garcia as well, just because of I want to buy a guy who seems like he maybe is taking a step forward rather than sticking with a totally steady, totally safe. Very happy if I already have him, Andrew McCutchen, but if I'm going out to try to get one of these guys, I'm going to shoot for the ceiling. I really don't see the floor being that much lower for Adolis García. And hopefully the floor on this show was very high as well, but that's going to wrap things up for this episode of the Athletic Fantasy Baseball Podcast. Derek and I will be back with you on Sunday as we look at fab and waivers for the upcoming week, and we'll be back live with you on StreamYard, so be sure to check us out. We'll put the link out. You'll be able to get your questions in. All that fun stuff coming back your way this Sunday. To Tim Britton and Jake Kaplan, thanks so much for joining us. I am Michael Beller. We'll talk to you later.